Disclaimer: this content is intended for mature audiences only. Viewer discretion is advised. My name is Clara. I'm 32, and for the last few months, I've felt like I'm unraveling in slow motion, like a thread pulling loose from the fabric of who I thought I was. There's this weight pressing on my chest every time I try to breathe easy, every time I lie awake in the dark and wonder when exactly everything started slipping away from me. I need to tell someone. I've kept this locked inside for so long. Maybe if I say it out loud, it'll stop eating me up from the inside. It all began after Dad passed away. Not my dad, but Tom's, my husband's father. I should say was my husband, maybe. That's part of the problem. When he died, something shifted between us. You'd think losing a parent would bring people closer, but instead, it felt like a wedge was driven between us, invisible, but cold and sharp. The silence that crept into our home after the funeral was not the kind of silence that comforts. It was heavy and brittle, like glass about to shatter. Tom's stepmother, Marlene, made a shocking request shortly after the funeral. I still can't believe how much that request unsettled everything, not just our relationship, but my whole sense of belonging. She asked us to keep her in the house, to help her grieve with us. I don't think she meant harm, but it felt like an invasion. Like a stranger stepping into a space that was supposed to be ours. Before all this, Tom and I had something I thought was rare. We were safe, the kind of safe that lets you drop your walls and just be yourself. Our nights were warm and tangled, our mornings soft with lazy touches and whispered secrets. I remember one night, about 2 years ago, when we danced in the kitchen with no music, just the hum of the refrigerator and the softness of his hands on my waist. He kissed me then like I was the only woman alive, his breath warm and sure against my skin. That's how love felt, thrilling and steady at once. But now? Now, the kisses are quick, like an obligation checked off a list. His hands are cold when they brush my back, more out of habit than desire. When I try to reach for him, to curl into his arms, there's a distance I can't bridge, like he's guarding something, or maybe just himself. I crave the closeness we had, but he seems to pull away, retreating behind walls I don't know how to scale. The nights are the hardest. We lie side by side, the space between us growing like a chasm. Sometimes, I reach out, my fingers barely grazing his arm, hoping for some spark, a sign that he's still there. But his body is a fortress, and my touches fall flat. The tension coils inside me, frustrating and lonely. I want him, but I also want to be wanted. Instead, I'm left with a hollow ache. I remember a morning last month, the moment I truly realized how much had changed. We had spent the night pretending everything was fine, but in the early hours, I woke up and found him sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor. I reached out, hesitating, and he flinched away from my touch. Not out of anger, but something quieter, fear? Guilt? I couldn't tell. That's when it hit me, the man I loved was still here, but he was slipping away too. Not physically, but inside. And no matter how much I tried to hold on, I felt myself fading alongside him. The grief, the requests, the silence, they all piled up, burying the intimacy we once shared beneath layers of unspoken pain. I don't know how to fix this. I don't even know if it's fixable anymore. But here I am, confessing it all, hoping someone understands. Because the hardest part isn't losing someone you love. It's losing the version of them you used to know, and slowly, losing yourself right along with them. Tom's a firefighter. I used to admire how he carried himself, strong, steady, like nothing could break him. But now, that same strength feels like a wall between us. After Dad's passing and Marlene moving in, the space in our home started to feel crowded in all the wrong ways, and so did our relationship. Last Tuesday was a perfect example. I'd just gotten home after a draining day at the clinic where I work as a physical therapist. My feet ached, my mind was tangled with patients' worries, and all I wanted was to collapse into something soft, something safe. I found Tom in the kitchen, pulling off his heavy boots, his face warm with sweat from the training drills he'd had that afternoon. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He came over and wrapped his arms around me, that big, solid grip I used to crave. But tonight, instead of melting into it, I stiffened. It wasn't that I didn't want his touch. I did. But what I wanted more was to talk, to connect without words but with feeling, to feel like I was truly seen. "Rough day?" he asked, his voice low and rough, like always after a long shift. "Yeah," I murmured, trying to match his hug without really succeeding. I wanted to tell him about how Marlene had left a pile of her things in the guest room again, how Tom hadn't said a word about it, about how suffocated I felt. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I pulled away a little, hoping he'd notice. He tightened his hold, like he didn't want to let go. "Come on, Clara, you're burning me up," he joked, trying to lighten the mood. But it wasn't funny. I wanted him to understand that physical closeness without emotional closeness felt hollow. That the way he tried to show love with touch, as if it could erase the distance, just made me feel more alone. Later that night, when the world was quiet and the only sound was the ticking clock, I sat on the edge of the bed, watching him strip off his uniform. He glanced over and gave me a tired smile, then came over to sit beside me. His hand found mine, warm and reassuring. But the silence between us was thick, like we were both waiting for a bridge to form out of words that neither of us knew how to say. "I miss you," I whispered finally, surprising myself. "I miss us. Before all of this." He squeezed my hand and nodded. "Me too," he said, voice soft, almost breaking. But then he reached over, pulling me into a hug, trying again with his body what his words couldn't fully express. His hands roamed gently over my back, but instead of comfort, I felt a flicker of frustration. Because the truth was, I needed more than touch, I needed him to show me he was still inside with me, emotionally. I needed to feel safe in his heart, not just in his arms. Sometimes I wonder if he knows how far away he's become, or if he thinks that all we need is to be close physically. Maybe he's scared, like me, but he hides it behind quiet touches and tired smiles. We're both grasping for something that feels lost, and in the process, we're missing each other completely. That night, after he finally pulled away to get ready for bed, I stayed sitting on the edge of the mattress, feeling the ache of all the unspoken things between us. I wanted to tell him about the letter I found in Marlene's room, a note that hinted she wasn't just grieving, but planning something that might change everything for us. But I couldn't. I swallowed it down because every time I tried to speak, the words caught like stones in my throat. Instead, I closed my eyes and wished for a way back to the way things used to be, when his hugs made me feel like I was home, and his kisses made me feel wanted, not desperate for something more. But maybe that way back doesn't exist anymore. Maybe the only thing left is this fragile dance, him reaching out with touch, and me retreating into silence, each of us longing for a connection that keeps slipping just beyond our grasp. I stood by the kitchen counter, chopping vegetables for dinner, when Tom came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist. The smell of his cologne, faint, familiar, made my stomach tighten in that way it used to when I first fell for him. But now, instead of warmth, I felt a knot of something sharper, like discomfort wrapped in hesitation. He pressed a kiss to my neck, soft and lingering. My body should have responded, should have leaned in, but instead I pulled away just enough to create distance without saying a word. I caught his eyes in the reflection of the window, and I saw confusion flicker there. "Hey," he murmured, voice low. "What's wrong?" I shook my head, trying to smile. "Nothing. Just tired." He didn't look convinced, but didn't press. Instead, he cupped my face and leaned in for a kiss. The way his lips met mine was gentle but insistent, like he was trying to remind me of something I'd forgotten. But I felt nothing. The kiss felt like a routine, a checkbox rather than a spark. I closed my eyes, hoping to summon the feeling, but all I could think about was how far apart we drifted. His hand slid down to my hip, giving a light smack, and I flinched almost imperceptibly. He pulled back, brows furrowed. "Clara? Did I hurt you?" "No," I whispered, stepping away to rinse a knife in the sink. The cool water helped steady my racing thoughts. But inside, I was crumbling. Later, on the couch, he reached for my hand. I let him hold it, but my fingers didn't intertwine with his like they used to. The silence between us grew thick, heavy with things unsaid. I miss us, he said quietly, tracing circles on my skin. I want you. I want this to feel right again. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to want him like I used to. But instead, I felt a wall rising between us, a protective barrier I didn't know how to lower. When he leaned in for another kiss, I hesitated, my heart pounding. I pulled back, avoiding his lips and looking away. Why? He asked, hurt shadowing his face. I couldn't find the words. How do you explain that sometimes love feels like a burden? That the space between desire and obligation is a canyon you're afraid to cross? That every touch feels weighted with expectation and fear? In that moment, I realized how much I was withdrawing, retreating into myself like a frightened animal. It wasn't that I didn't want him. I did. I just didn't know how to want what had become so complicated and fragile. As I lay awake later, the silence pressing down on me, the same thought kept echoing through my mind: why does everything have to turn into sex? The dinner table was set with care, candles flickering softly, the faint scent of roasted rosemary filling the air. Tom had made the effort to cook, trying to recreate one of our early dates, the ones where laughter flowed easily and the world outside seemed to vanish. I wanted to meet him halfway. I wanted to let this moment be something healing. But as we sat down, the silence between us grew heavy, like the room itself was holding its breath. Marlene's presence lingered just beyond the edges of my thoughts, her endless demands, the way she slipped into our lives like a shadow no one wanted but couldn't seem to push away. Tom reached across the table, brushing a stray lock of hair behind my ear. Clara, what's going on? You've been so distant lately. I feel like I'm losing you. His words were gentle, but they cracked something open inside me. I swallowed hard, blinking back a sudden rush of tears that surprised me with their intensity. The past weeks of silence, frustration, and loneliness collided all at once, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. I'm losing myself, Tom, I whispered, voice breaking. After your dad died, everything changed. And then Marlene, she moved in like she owns this house, like she owns you. It's like I'm invisible in my own life. I'm supposed to be your wife, but I'm just a shadow in the background. He opened his mouth, maybe to argue, maybe to comfort, but the words caught in his throat. Instead, he just stared at me, confusion and hurt mingling in his eyes. You don't see me anymore, I continued, tears spilling freely now. You don't want me anymore. I reach for you, and you pull away like I'm some kind of obligation. It's like I'm drowning in all this silence and you don't even notice. Tom's jaw clenched, his fingers tightening on the edge of the table. The romantic moment crumbled around us, replaced by something raw and jagged. I'm trying, he finally said, voice low but strained. I'm trying to hold us together. Trying isn't enough, I snapped, the frustration pouring out of me like a flood. Because every time I reach for you, I feel like I'm just reaching for a ghost. I'm scared, Tom. Scared that this isn't just about your dad or Marlene. I'm scared that you don't want me anymore. The room was silent again, but this time it felt hollow and sharp. Tom looked away, the weight of my words settling between us like a wall neither of us knew how to climb. After dinner, I retreated to the bedroom, the sting of my own outburst mixing with a deep, gnawing guilt. How had it come to this? I loved Tom. I wanted to be the woman he needed. But somewhere along the way, I'd lost sight of who I was in this marriage, swallowed whole by grief, resentment, and a painful disconnect that neither of us had the words to fix. Lying on the bed, tears still damp on my cheeks, I realized that the moment I'd been dreading had arrived. The moment when grief and unspoken demands from a stepmother had fractured something I thought was unbreakable. I hated that I'd shouted. I hated that I'd scared him. But most of all, I hated feeling so utterly alone in a marriage that was supposed to be my safe place. Was there still a way back? Or had Marlene's shocking request and the shadow of his father's death pulled us into a place too dark to escape? The questions swirled inside me, unanswered and raw, as I reached out in the dark, hoping, maybe, that Tom was still there too. Days passed like slow-moving shadows, each one stretching longer than the last. The air between Tom and me grew colder, a silence so thick it felt like a third presence in the room. I watched him retreat, the way his shoulders slumped as if the weight of everything, his father's death, Marlene's demands, and my outburst, had pressed him into himself. He stopped coming to bed early like he used to. Instead, he stayed up late, sitting alone in the living room with the TV flickering but his eyes distant, unfocused. One evening, I found him staring out the window, his face caught in the dim glow of the streetlight. The sadness in his eyes wasn't anger, it was grief, exhaustion, confusion. He wasn't a villain in this story. He was just as broken, just as lost as I was. I missed him fiercely. I missed the man who used to pull me close and make me laugh until my stomach ached. I missed the way his hands felt on my skin, the way his voice could soothe even the hardest days. But the more I longed for him, the more I froze, unsure how to cross the distance that had grown between us. One night, I reached out to brush a stray hair from his forehead as he sat on the couch. He flinched, eyes flickering with surprise, then something softer, maybe hope? But I pulled back quickly, afraid that if I tried too hard, I'd only push him further away. I don't know how to fix this, I whispered, more to myself than to him. Tom didn't answer, just nodded slowly, the weight of silence filling the room again. The guilt settled deep inside me, a persistent ache that gnawed at every quiet moment. I felt responsible for the fractures, for the coldness that replaced our warmth. But I also knew grief wasn't something either of us could just snap out of. It was messy and slow, and it demanded patience neither of us seemed to have. I lay awake one night, turning over everything, the loss, the tension, the way Marlene's request had disrupted us in ways I hadn't fully understood. I wondered if love was enough to pull us back, or if the distance had grown too wide. Some part of me wanted to try. To hold on, to fight for us, even if I didn't know where to start. Another part whispered that maybe walking away was the only way to save what little was left of myself. When morning came, I didn't have an answer. But I knew I had to decide soon, whether to reach across the silence and try again, or to let go and find myself somewhere else. The morning light filtered softly through the curtains as Tom sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. For a moment, I hesitated in the doorway, watching him, the same man I had loved, and yet someone I barely recognized anymore. But something in his tired eyes told me he was still there, beneath the layers of grief and distance. I took a slow breath and crossed the room. Sitting beside him, I reached out, my fingers brushing against his. He looked up, startled, then closed his eyes briefly, leaning into the touch like it was a lifeline. "We need to talk," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. He nodded, setting the mug down. "I know. I don't want to lose us, Clara." The conversation that followed wasn't easy. We peeled back the layers we'd both been hiding behind: fear, pain, resentment. I told him how Marlene's presence felt like an invasion, how his silence after Dad's death made me feel invisible. He shared his own struggles, his guilt, his helplessness in the face of loss. For the first time in months, we acknowledged the cracks without blaming each other. We agreed on boundaries: Marlene would get outside help, not move back in, we'd carve out time for just us, even if it was small moments. Most importantly, we promised to keep talking, even when it felt uncomfortable. Later that evening, Tom came into the bedroom after I'd already slipped under the covers. Without a word, he sat beside me and pulled me close in a quiet, steady hug. His arms around me felt like a fragile promise, not a fix, but a beginning. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. It wasn't the fiery passion we once had, but it was something real, something worth fighting for. As he drifted off to sleep on the couch that night, I realized healing wouldn't be instant. It would be slow, uneven, messy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe, with time, we could find our way back to each other. If you'd told me a year ago where I'd be now, I wouldn't have believed you. Back then, I thought love was simple, a steady flame that, once lit, would never falter. But grief and loss taught me otherwise. They taught me that love is messy, fragile, and sometimes terrifying. I'm Clara, and I learned that the hardest part of love isn't the passion or the kisses or the easy moments, it's the quiet, raw space in between. The space where two people exist, not as perfect versions of themselves, but as broken, scared, trying. I learned that desire isn't always loud or fiery. Sometimes, it's a whisper, a longing for connection so deep it's almost invisible. When Tom's father died, and Marlene stepped into our lives with her shocking request, everything shifted beneath my feet. I thought I was losing him, losing us. But what I was really losing was the illusion of control, the belief that love would protect me from pain. I realized that emotional intimacy is the hardest kind of intimacy to hold on to. It takes more than touches and kisses, it requires vulnerability, patience, and sometimes, just showing up even when it hurts. I learned that silence can be as damaging as words, and that the spaces between us need to be filled with more than presence, they need understanding. Whether Tom stayed or left isn't what matters most. What matters is what I found in myself, a quiet strength I didn't know I had. The courage to face uncomfortable truths, to cry, to scream, to ask for what I needed. The willingness to accept that sometimes, love means letting go. I want you to remember this: love isn't a fairy tale or a perfect movie scene. It's a fragile thread woven through pain and joy, connection and loss. It's about showing up even when you're afraid. It's about finding yourself in the cracks and still choosing to be whole. So, if you're listening and feeling lost or broken, know this: you're not alone. And maybe the most profound kind of love is the one you give yourself, when no one else can. That love, the steady, imperfect kind, is where healing begins.